Now we'll deal with the clade Lipotyphla, also called the Lipotyphla, EU Lipotyphla. In your textbook, that is, but it's also referenced in your lab manual as such. So amongst the Lipotyphla, there are three orders that we're going to, I beg your pardon, two orders and that we're going to deal with, and three families. There are four altogether, but there are three that we're going to deal with. We're only really going to deal with two in any detail. One important order is the hedgehogs, the Erinaceomorpha, and the family is the Erinacidae. And a common one, actually it's used in the pet trade here in the United States, is Erinaceus europaeus. Some of you will have seen videos and photos of this beast. Unfortunately, we don't have a specimen of it, but this is a photo that I took of one in Ireland. They're quite common in Ireland, where I come from. And I'd like you to know this species to genus. And there are about 24 species of hedgehogs in 11 genera and 2 subfamilies throughout the world. They're a fascinating group of animals, and the video is going to tell you a little bit more about hedgehogs. So it's important for you to know about them. So we're going to move on from the order Erinaceomorpha to the order Soricomorpha. The order Soricomorpha includes 3 families, 2 major families, the shrews and the moles. But before we get on to those, I'm going to talk very briefly about the Solenodons. The Solenodons we'll address in lecture. We don't address them in the lab. But there are 3 species in one genus. They're found on in Cuba and Haiti and the Dominican Republic. One of the species was thought to be extinct, but they still survive. All 3 still survive in the wild. So that's the family Solenodontidae, or the Solenodons. They are fascinating looking organisms. I've never been to that part of the world, but they are on my bucket list. I would love to see Solenodons in the wild. They're like giant shrews, or it's hard to describe them. They're just amazing looking animals. To me, they would remind me of what primitive mammals must have looked like during the times of the dinosaurs. So let's deal with the shrews first, the family Soricidae. And I've got 3 species out here for you to look at. Now, I realize that this is going to be a little tricky, because without you actually handling them, all shrews kind of look alike. And a shrew is a shrew is a shrew, sort of. And there are over 370 species of shrews in the world in 26 genera. So there's a lot of diversity. And when you meet shrew biologists at meetings, they get very excited about the diversity of this group of animals that they work with. But the first one we're going to talk about here is a fairly common shrew in the valley here, called the ornate shrew, Sorex ornatus. And here you see it's a tiny little shrew. And there are some study skins of it here put up. I haven't even bothered to put out the skulls. They're really tiny and very delicate. I'll show you a skull from a bigger shrew in a minute, and you can see how delicate here. The tail of this one just about came off of my hand. I should be holding it this way. So here's another one. So these are ornate shrews. They're very small animals with, they're insectivores with a very high metabolic rate. When we trap for shrews and we're trying to look for their presence, and there is an endangered species in the valley here that I want you to know about, and I'm going to tell you about it in a moment. But when we're looking for its presence and we want to trap for it, we will set what are called pitfall traps. And these are like coffee cans. We'll bury them in the ground with the lip of the can just at the ground surface, and we'll put a little lid on top, but we'll raise it above the ground level. And we have these really small, we want these shrews to go in there, but you have to provide enough food so that the shrews won't starve to death if they get in there. And they need living food. You can't just put, well, yeah, you could put cat food in there. The cat food will keep them going as well, but they really love mealworms. So you could put, you know, lots of mealworms in there, or, you know, regular worms too, things like that. So this is, you can see the belly is kind of gray, and the top part is a tan brown in color. Put it down here gently. If you look, you'll see that the tail isn't very long. The tail is about half the body length or so. So they're just very small shrews. Now, there is a subspecies. There are about 9 subspecies of the ornate shrew in California, and there is one subspecies that is listed as an endangered species because of agriculture in the valley, especially in the south end of the valley, and it's called the Buena Vista Lake shrew. There used to be a big lake at the south end of the valley called Buena Vista Lake. Well, there used to be a very big lake down there, but that got drained nearly 100 years ago for cotton farming. Buena Vista Lake is a smaller one. Tulare Lake was the big one. Buena Vista Lake was an offshoot of Tulare Lake. And the subspecies is Sorex ornatus relictus. And there are still populations of it hanging on in places. And my colleague, Dr. Brian Seifer, with the Endangered Species Recovery Program, he has a very special survey technique for this species. And he has a way to put little tubes out, and he puts mealworms or other bait in the tube. They're like little pieces of PVC tubing, and the shrews will go into the tubing to investigate the smell or the bait, and inevitably they will defecate in the tubes, and he can then do DNA analysis on the feces, the tiny little scats, or actually he can identify the shape of the scats too under the microscope, and he can tell whether it's an ornate shrew or some other species. Their scats, their fecal pellets are a different shape from other species. So that's the ornate shrew. Another shrew that we have along the west coast here is Trowbridge's shrew. Now, this one has a longer tail. This is Sorex trowbridgei, named after a chap named Trowbridge back in the 1800s. And it's much bigger. It's still a small animal, but it's much bigger than the ornate shrew. And this is it on an index card here, and you can see how it more than fills the index card. Its tail just extends beyond the index card here, and the tail is more than half the length of the body here. It's a much more robust animal, much bigger. Now I'm going to try to have you take a look at the skull of this one too. The skull is bigger and more substantial, so I'll try to get the iPhone down closer to it and see if it'll focus in on it and not be too blurry. I don't have too much control over this. So, I don't know how focused that is. Nah, it looks kind of crappy. But perhaps you'll notice that it doesn't have any zygomatic arch. That skull doesn't have any zygomatic arch, and they don't have ossified auditory bullae either, those ear capsules. You'll also notice that the teeth are stained, as if these guys were smokers or something. There's a dark brown staining on the teeth. A lot of shrews have that. There is actually a shrew called the white-toothed shrew, whose teeth are not that color. And so it's a little different from some of the others. Let me see if I can turn this one up a little here so you can see the other side. Now I can see the upper side of the skull, and you can see it's very delicate. It's like looking through some tissue paper there. Yeah, it's a bit blurred, I think, but that's so that's the skull of a shrew. That's a typical shrew, although that's maybe a tad on the larger size. And if any of you pick up owl pellets in areas where there are shrews, often you'll find the remains of shrew skulls inside owl pellets. The first owl pellets I ever dissected, I was a young college student at the time, were from barn owls in Ireland, where they were eating a lot of pygmy shrews, which are about the same size as these ornate shrews. And once the owl crunched those little shrews inside, they spit out the bones and hair in a pellet, and you can gather those pellets and dissect them to see what they're eating. But when you dissect the pellets, the cranium collapses completely, and there's all you're left with is the front part of the skull, the rostrum there, and the teeth and stuff like that part of the skull. So the brain case is pretty much completely gone, and you can see how delicate there that's not that surprising at all. So that's the Trowbridge's shrew. Okay, the next shrew I want you to be introduced to. Again, these are all California species, and you should know them to species and the sorts of habitats that you would find them in. You'll see all this in the handout. The next one I want you to know about is the American water shrew, Sorex palustris. Palustris is a reference to streams. And here I've got 3 of them out here for you to look at. And I'd encourage you to look these up online as well. They're in the video, the Life of Mammals video as well, the water shrew. There are water shrews around the world. These are amazing beasts. And I remember seeing one in the stream, jump into a stream in the Eastern Sierra and go swimming after invertebrates. Now, we may not be able to see what I want you to see here, but you'll see it's a fairly decent sized shrew as well. But notice the striking bicoloration on these shrews by comparison with the ornate shrew and the Trowbridge shrew that we talked about. They're very dark on top, and they're white underneath. They're very white underneath, and when they swim underwater, the fur traps air bubbles, and they get kind of silvery underwater. And they're excellent swimmers. One of the reasons that they are excellent swimmers is their rear feet turn into paddles. Now, you may not be able to see this so well, but we'll do what we can here. And the reason they turn into paddles is the toes and edges of the hind feet have a fringe of stiff hairs. And those hairs would act as if when we're swimming or paddleboarding or whatever, if we're wearing flippers. And it's like that they've webbed feet. So this is how you can tell an aquatic shrew from a terrestrial shrew, that they have these stiff hairs on the hind feet. So this is Sorex palustris, the water shrew, the American water shrew. an amazing, amazing aquatic insectivore. So those are 3 different species, all members of the family Soricidae in the order Soricomorpha. Okay? Now, again, remember, that's only 3 species, and there are over 370 species in that order. Now, the other fascinating insectivore, some of you would already be familiar with these ones from your own back garden, are moles. And these are much maligned animals because a lot of people confuse them with gophers, and that's too bad. They're in the family Talpidae, and the one we're going to look at here is Scapanus latimanus. And the scientific name there is the species part, latimanus, means wide hand. Lati means wide, manus is hand. So right away, that's going to tell you that these guys have wide paws for digging. And here you'll see, I've got 3 specimens out here, and they look a little different in terms of their pelage. Just a little bit different in terms of their pelage, but if you look at their paws, they're all nearly completely fossorial. They spend their entire lives underground. And I'm going to flip them underneath. You'll see that they're fusiform or torpedo-like in shape. They don't have much of a tail, a tiny little stub of a tail. Also, look at the fur. They don't have bilateral coloration like that water shrew we just looked at. They're the same color top and bottom. They don't need adaptive coloration to hide themselves against the water bottom or against the sky, which is what bilateral coloration is all about, because they're underground. They're in the dark. But look at the way the fur will lie in either direction. It'll lie pushing it forward or pushing it backward. It doesn't have a particular, and that's an advantage if you're a fossorial animal going through tight spaces. You're not going to be held up by the fur. And here's the latimanus that we're talking about. Look at those 4 paws. Look how wide they are for digging. By contrast, look at the rear paws. The rear paws aren't wide at all. That's just one. Let's look at the other one. That one's got wide paws again too. Scapanus latimanus, wide paws for digging. Here's another one. This one's even wider. This is a bigger one. Look how wide those are. Okay, so, and these are good to have in your garden. I mean, some people get upset that they're, digging little mounds or burrows, but they aerate the soil, they get rid of soil pests and so on. Gophers are a different story. Gophers are eating your vegetables underground and things like that, but the moles are good. Moles are good to have. Okay, now let's take a look at the skull as well. Okay, here you see the skull, and you can see that this is a very robust skull. Now, the zygomatic arch is broken on the right-hand side, but it's still very much there on the left side. It's slender. Now, the shrews don't have a zygomatic arch, but these guys do. And they do have bullae. And look at those teeth. They have got some fairly powerful looking teeth there. See those teeth? It's a pretty powerful skull. Move these out of the way here, and we can put these down. So you can see those are obviously those are not the teeth of a vegetation eater. This is an animal that is used to feeding on invertebrates and whatever it can catch underground, earthworms and other organisms, beetle larvae, whatever it can get. This is a powerful animal. Okay, this is Scapanus latimanus, family Talpidae. Now, there's another thing we want to look at with this animal. This is a fossorial animal, lives underground all the time, year-round. So it's adapted for digging. Here, and this is a skeleton of it. And look at that body. Look at the anatomy of this. Look at the limb structure. Okay, it's got short, powerful limbs. Those big, broad hands that we just talked about. There's the skull we just talked about. But look at those short, powerful limbs, front and back. So this animal is not adapted for running or for jumping or anything like this. This is an animal that is adapted for essentially swimming through soil. Now, if you want to, I've got another one here. I've got two specimens here that are mounted. This one's under plexiglass, but it's a little cleaner. Here you can see it. Those short, powerful fore and hind limbs. Okay. Again, like I said, it's as if it is swimming through soil. Now you could compare this with a skeleton of an alligator, or earlier we talked about an armadillo, but in a different context. And this is that same armadillo that we looked at earlier. And if you look at the skeleton of the armadillo, which is also a digger, and you'll see similarities. You'll see similarities in its anatomy as well, and its skeleton. It is adapted for digging and having those short, powerful limbs as well, and a very robust vertebral column. So that's an overview of the Insectivore lab, where we have 6 different orders, 5 of them represented in lab, 4 of them well represented: the shrews, the moles, and then also the elephant shrew, and also the colugo and the tree shrews. Actually, yeah, 5. The 4 orders, and we also had the hedgehog just as a photo. And you also need to study the video well also. So that's it.